弟兄姐妹们平安，欢迎大家来到在基督里跨越世代这个对话的系列。那设计这个系列的目的很简单，我们希望透过跟在教会里边长大，现在还在服侍青少年的一些年轻人来对话，帮助我们的父母更明白在美国文化中长大的孩子他们内心的世界，也帮助年轻一代更加认识父母背后的爱和担忧和牺牲，可以找到彼此沟通的语言。我们两代人其实都很彼此相爱哈，只是语言不一样，表达爱的方式也不一样。有时候父母说的是前途、责任、稳定，可是孩子心里感受到的却是压力、期待、害怕让父母失望。所以我们盼望透过这些坦诚的对话，让彼此听见，我们一起来学习怎么样在基督里彼此相爱，成为一个可以陪伴下一代走信仰和人生道路的教会。
Victor in church was different from Victor in school.
But growing up, I think it was really hard to know how to communicate with my parents.
That is how God's created me, and some of that I think is in the American school system, you're encouraged to think big and creative and follow your dream.
It's really, there's such a big gap over there. 我们今天第一个话题呢，就是在两个世界中间成长的经历。我们知道我们的下一代他们其实是在两个不同的文化当中在父母这边呢是父母的带来的华人的文化，那在他们生活的圈子里其实是一个美国的文化，他们可能比我们感受到这种文化的张力更加强烈，因为我们可能多数时候还是生活在华人文化当中，到了美国文化好像是一个去访问的人，一个客人但是他们却是两个文化的主人所以我们今天非常高兴来聆听他们的分享我首先要说明这个分享呢不是要批评父母也不是要为我们的孩子去为他们捍卫他们自己的一些想法，我们真的是希望是心和心的交流。 Both of you can introduce yourself first.
Yeah.
Victor.
So my name is Victor, and I grew up at ECC, was at ECC all the way until the end of high school. From ECC out of Washington for almost a decade before coming, or more than a decade actually, before coming back, and am now serving in YSF as one of the YSF counselors, and really happy to be here.
My name is Alyssa, and I was born and raised in Indiana. I moved to the East Side after graduating in the summer of 2022. Since then, I've been serving on the YSF team since 3 years ago.
Okay, we're going to come back to today's topic, asking them about how their experience is growing up in the two cultures.
So actually, when I was growing up, I didn't really think too much about growing up between two worlds. I think I was like, yeah, this is like what school is like. This is what church is like. This is what Chinese school or swim team, like all these different places I was in, that's just like what it was like. And I don't think it was until probably more recently that I began to have language for my experiences growing up. That actually what I realized that I did very naturally in all of these spaces was something called code switching, which basically what I was Victor in church was different from Victor in school, and it was different from the Victor at home, and I just learned to adjust like how I acted in each of these places to best fit in, and would be a little bit more Chinese maybe at church, and then maybe a little bit more American or less Chinese in my school settings. And I think just very naturally did that, but I think as I reflected on it in recent years, probably realized it was actually pretty tiring to switch between that. And then now I think in trying to figure out which parts of each of these different codes do I want to keep as I continue going through adulthood.
Wow. So you're saying you didn't really realize you're living in different cultures. You just naturally are doing the transition.
Yeah, I think I realized that I had maybe white classmates or teammates on swim team, and then I had my like Chinese or Asian friends, and I would maybe more naturally connect with some in certain ways and with others in other ways. And so I saw that difference, but I don't think because I grew up at ECC and was in the Bellevue School District, and we had a lot of Chinese and Asian American families there, I don't think it felt like it was two totally different worlds, but it was kind of this blended world that I just learned to navigate the different aspects of each world.
My kids once told me, Rebecca once told me, she didn't even realize there are two different cultures until she was in the third year of middle school. And she was hugely bothered by the thought that, actually, I was actually in different cultures. And she felt I would actually, if I didn't know that, it would be easier for me. Now that I know that, I'm actually have to adjust. And like you said, it's kind of tiring to make intentional adjustments.
Yeah. I think for me, when I went off to college and afterwards, definitely saw that, there's lots of different worlds that I had to navigate.
So I grew up in Indiana, and that was in our community, in our city, it was predominantly white people. And so honestly, I think my family and like my extended family were the only like Asians I really knew. But I didn't really feel unnatural as well to go out into school where I was with people who were way different than me. But yeah, I think because I was so close with my family growing up, it was easy to just always be able to I think I was, now that you're saying like code switching, I think there was like a sense of like code switching when I was at school. And then back when I was like, when I knew I was with my family, like I could be totally like comfortable and felt safe again. And safe in the aspect of like just being able to, I think, be more myself and be able to like do the like watch the things I like to watch, listen to the music I like to listen to. I think when it came to music, it was something I did with my parents a lot when we would drive to school, like to school, back from school, like to the store. Like we would always listen to like Vietnamese, like traditional music. But yeah, it was kind of funny when we were like for TV and entertainment wise, we would always watch like American TV or like we'd go to the library and we'd get like American movies. And that was something my parents also enjoyed. I think they liked being able to like learn about like this like American culture in that way. So.
The code switch actually is kind of a little bit hard for you sometimes when you do that, right? It's tiring. Are there any specific challenge you have faced growing up in this way?
I'll just say it's interesting because the Asian American space and the dialogue about being Asian American has changed a lot since like we were growing up until like more recently, because I think now there's so much discussion about what it means to be Asian American. There's lots of podcasts and books, and then there's like new TV shows and movies and songs that are making being Asian American cool or interesting. And so I think youth now compared to like when you were growing up, I think they have a lot more language and they think about it probably differently. Which I think, parents now probably have to approach it maybe differently than we did growing up. But I think speaking to challenges, I think in youth ministry, we talk about these like 3 big questions that the Fuller Youth Institute talks about that every teenager asks, which is about identity, belonging, and purpose. So like, who am I? Where do I belong? Who are my people? And then what am I here for? And I would say you heard a little bit about kind of belonging and identity of kind of in these different spaces. You turn up your like American side in one space, you turn up your Chinese side in another space, and then you maybe turn them down or adjust based on where you're at. And that can be a superpower, but that can also be tiring at times. I think the purpose question was the one that I think my family and I talked a lot about, especially as I was getting into like high school and even like college years. My dad would describe me as a dreamer, like lots of crazy ideas, big ideas, and I like to think about how can we do something new and interesting. And that was great. And I think some of that is how God's created me. And some of that I think is in the American school system, you're encouraged to think big and creative and follow your dreams. But that sometimes came in contrast with maybe my parents' value of stability and maybe avoiding risk. And I think some of that comes from like my grandparents passing that down to my parents, and maybe my parents like immigrating to the US. And even like when I worked in Taiwan for a year and a half after college, I saw like the schooling system in Taiwan really emphasizes like not standing out and trying to fit in, keep your head down so you can be successful. And so I think we had a lot of discussions, especially as I was in high school and college, thinking about what I wanted to do with my future. And we would talk about like, I want to do this thing. And they're like, well, have you considered maybe the potential consequences of making that decision? And then I think by God's grace, and something I'm really grateful for, is we began having these conversations about what things are Chinese values, what things are American values, and then what things are biblical, gospel-centered, kingdom-minded values, and how do we compare and contrast these, and then ultimately seek to follow God. And hopefully sometimes it overlaps with the values that we hold to be important, but if not, how do we let go of our cultural values to pursue Jesus? But those conversations, it sounds nice when I talk about it now, but sometimes they were pretty heated and like challenging conversations to have too.
I tend to think for, the Chinese, Asian living in America, we are already the bunch of people who are able to, takes at least we are just carrying a couple of suitcase and come to a new land. That's already pretty adventurous.
Yeah, for sure.
But you're right. I mean, back deep down, we're still seeking stability. Even the fact we come to the U.S., for the most of us, it's actually just to search for a better life and stable job and family. So but when you talk about challenges of two cultures and then you bring up the biblical value, I think that's really a blessing to grow up in this way, because ultimately there will always be a conflict between those two cultures. But as long as we have the same foundation, as if something we can actually always work out, if we looking to God, great. So how about Alyssa? I know you grew up in a non-believers family, right? So how do you face the challenges?
My dad is Chinese but grew up in Vietnam, escaped Vietnam and then came to the US. And then in his early 20s, he went back to Vietnam, met my mom, and then brought my mom to the US. And so like growing up, like my dad was fluent in English, Cantonese, and Vietnamese. My mom only really spoke Vietnamese. And I think my dad was really proud to be like a US citizen when he got that. And so he only spoke to me and my siblings in English. And while my mom was only able to communicate to us in Vietnamese and really only understand Vietnamese. But growing up, I think it was really hard to know how to communicate with my parents. Like my dad was the primary English speaker, so he'd be the ones that took us to school, did all like our paperwork, doctor's appointments, cared for us in that way, while my mom was more about like the emotional support. And so when it came to like day-to-day life, I felt myself like relying on my dad a lot. But yeah, and then in doing so, I felt like I kind of shut out my mom a little bit, just because I didn't have the language, or I felt like I didn't have the language to speak to her for like things about what's going on in school, or and just like day-to-day life. In doing so, I think it was really hard to like learn how to communicate with her until I went to college and I realized how important it was to just be able to talk to my mom. And then, I was in college when I, started going to church, came to faith. And when I was having like the conversations with my parents for the first time about like, what does faith mean to me? I felt like it was really hard. It was like really scary and really hard. And I was putting that struggle, I think, in my own head, where like, I remember like telling them like I wanted to get baptized. It wasn't as hard as I thought, because at the end of the day, they were my parents, right? And I feel like outside of just like language, there's a lot of other things that they can like pick up when it comes to communication, like my body language, my facial expressions, like the tone of my voice. So yeah, I think those were like, that was like a big challenge, I think, in terms of trying to navigate all of that.
Right. I can really relate to what you said about the language and the difficulty of communication with your parents. That's really the biggest challenge I'm facing in living in America, and my kids are growing up in this culture. Even I'm able to speak English and have basic communications. I always feel there's this just unspoken sort of a gap between me and the culture. I would really relate to your mom and your dad as well. Sometimes I think parents is not like we don't want to understand our kids or we don't try. It's really there is such a big gap over there. I think that's something I always remind my kids. We are trying very hard, but sometimes it's just very difficult. We have to have more time, patience. We talk about all the challenges. I hope there's something good about growing up in these two cultures. You want to share some of the benefit or some good thing you see?
I think I alluded to this earlier, but I think growing up Chinese American or with multiple cultures, you really have this superpower of knowing how to interact with lots of different people. Because like even just Chinese and American, like Chinese is a word that points to like cultures of so many other like people groups, and then America too is very diverse. And so I think learning to navigate between these spaces, you learn how to work with people really well, which makes you a really great student, a friend, employee, like leader. Like all of these things are things that we talk about in the workplace now as a young adult, that how do you learn to work with diverse people? And then I think as a Christian too, the Bible is written from an Eastern context, or many parts of it are. And so growing up Chinese, you also, I think, have a greater appreciation of those parts of the Bible, but then you can compare and contrast it with like your Western values or upbringing, and then I think understand the Bible in a richer way. And I think same thing for God too. Like for me, I love doing missions or short-term missions and working with people from different backgrounds, because I think every culture gives you just a glimpse of who God is, and when you have multiple different lenses, then you get a fuller glimpse of the multifaceted nature of God. And so those are aspects I think that I'm really grateful for. I don't think I could have said that when I was younger, but now, like looking back or as I'm continuing in my life, those are parts that I'm really grateful for, even though they were hard parts.
This is great. I was wondering about this, and this is the first time ever I heard so clearly from somebody who grew up in the Chinese church. The question I was wondering about is, what's so good about growing up in the Chinese church?
Growing up, like I was really close with my extended family, like my cousins. We all grew up within, like, I think 9 of us grew up within 13 years of each other. So we were like, there was always multiple of us going to school at the same time. And I think like as like the only like Asian Americans in our school, like not only were we able to, I think really like I feel safe with each other, but we felt safe going into like new environments together and encouraging each other in that way. And I think, yeah, so like when I came to school, like we all had like our own interests and stuff, and we all had like our own groups, but we were able to kind of like be like a connector for those other groups. I think just our willingness to kind of go out and explore our own interests, but also have this like familial like importance on family, coming from like our Asian culture, being able to like encourage one another in doing so, and kind of, I don't know, it was kind of cool to just kind of see people get connected outside of just like us. But I think it was interesting in our school dynamic, at least, that we were able to bring that. And I think with the importance of family, I think that really helped me also understand like the importance of like a spiritual family as well. Like after like going to college on my own, after like family, and I was like kind of by myself, I think there was always a part of me that still yearned for like a community, or even if like closer than like community, but like a family. And when I found that in church, it just felt so natural. And yeah, I think wanting that, like not only like being able to get that for myself, but wanting to share that and bring others into that as well.
Like all of us want to be seen and known and to be loved. And when we're with people who share similar stories, right? Like if maybe your parents are Chinese and you grew up in the US, but then like I think for me, I've moved a lot over the past 10 years. And so I think my identity now is more than just Chinese American. It has like little splotches of like the different places I've lived. And so I think connect even more with people who also have moved a lot too, or maybe have different aspects of their identity in addition to Chinese American. And so I think it's always just we're always trying to find people where we can kind of vibe at the same frequency, where we don't have to explain a lot of the food we like, the places we like to hang out, the music we like to listen to, the movies that we watched, like and then of course like the deeper things, like where's the value of the Chinese Heritage Church. And I think it comes from, we all have this story that of how we need Jesus, and that often, because of I think the importance of family in Chinese families, the gospel becomes most alive when it touches the story of our family. And so I think in a Chinese Heritage Church, we have that opportunity to then begin talking about the brokenness that we see in our family, whether it be in our like parents or grandparents, or even between kids and parents, or within the marriage. And we get to bring the gospel into that. And I think a Chinese church is better able to speak into that than probably another church, because you're able to communicate and understand some of those stories in a way that other communities might not be able to as well.
Yeah, that's exactly what the answer I got from one of the young adults when I was asking him, with all those churches you can choose from when you move to Seattle, why do you choose a Chinese church? He said, number one, it just feels like family because he grew up in a Chinese church. Number two, there's a shared traumatized experience of growing up in a Chinese church, which will not be understood if you go to another church.
Hopefully healing too.
Exactly. That's why I feel this is a value. We should see that as where God's grace is, and help the next generation not to go through the same traumatized experience, maybe. Hopefully. Sure. So speaking of which, anything you want to tell either the parents or the first-gen immigrants or church in general of how we can better understand each other culture-wise?
Just like 3 really quick tidbits. One, I think you mentioned this earlier, is just to be curious. I think all of us are really complex people with really unique stories that God is working in and working through us as well. And so parents, be curious about your kids. Kids also be curious about your parents, and keep on learning about each other and what God is doing there. I think 2, find people to do the journey with. Easy like athletic things, and one of them was like biking across America. Find a coach, find some buddies to do it with. And I think similarly, being a parent or being a teenager is a really hard thing. And so I think similarly to if you're going to bike across America, find people who can mentor you and support you. If you need more support professionally, like seek out that support too. But then also find the families for your kids and for the parents to like journey alongside together. And then I think we talk a lot about how to prevent conflict or tension. And I think this is the hope of this series too, is to begin learning more so we can help minimize the differences. But conflict is always going to happen. And so I also think about the importance of how do we repair the relationship. And so how do you learn to within like a marriage, but also like across the cultural and generational differences and divide, how do you build that repair whenever there's conflict or tension? Because we all know it's going to happen. But Alyssa and I were talking like earlier before this recording that we had this parent and youth night, and it was really wonderful to get to worship together, play games, and then we ended with a time of sharing where people shared kind of their own stories and asked questions of each other, which was really fun to listen to. But we asked, like, as one of the reflection questions, what is something that stands out to you from the other generation sharing? And both the kids and the adults in my group shared that they just saw how hard the other side is working. and it's easier to hear that when it's not your own like kid or your own parent. But they're like, I see how you guys are working so hard and you guys just want to love the other side really well, but it's just sometimes you miss each other. And so I think that's just like, I think my encouragement to all the listeners is that parents, like, we know you're trying so hard. Kids, we know you're also trying so hard to love each other well, and you just want to be loved too. And my encouragement is to know that more important than any of like us seeing it, it's that God sees you and is walking with you in that, because it can feel, so lonely, and I think maybe so like hopeless at times. But God is the giver of all good things, of all wisdom, courage, patience, and love, and so many other things. And I just hope that, that can be an encouragement to continue running the race well, and to persevere, even though it can be challenging at times.
So good. That's so good. We all need that encouragement. Sometimes it is tiring, but continue to discover new things every day is something really worthwhile. You know, I almost want to ask you about some of the parents always struggle with what if the kids don't say anything, even if we want to say something.
I think when I was like reflecting again about like my own struggles like growing up, something I wish, like if I could go back, I wish I would go through that struggle of trying to communicate with my parents on a daily, because I think it was really easy for me to be okay with my mom specifically not understanding what I was doing in school, and I was okay with that. And I think for my mom, that also helped her. Like for her, it's kind of like no news is good news. And I think like that complacency on both sides led us to kind of drift apart a little bit. And I like now when I'm trying to like share the things I'm going through each day with her, at first it was really awkward because I was like, oh, I don't know how to express this thing. But by doing that every day, you can only get better. And if you're okay with it being silent, then it's going to be awkward when you try to do it again. So kind of just like exercising like a muscle that like we're not really used to doing, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. Like my mom like has learned how to like ask about different things that maybe she doesn't really know about like school, because she didn't grow up like going to high school or anything, so she was also just not super familiar with like the things I was going through. But she learned how to ask about like my friends, ask about the things that like I was actually interested in. Like when we'd go shopping, she'd ask about like, oh, what styles do you like? So finding different ways to be able to be on the same page, and then using that as an encouragement to continue to, learn about each other.
Like Alyssa said, there are so many things we can talk with each other, clothes and entertainment, video games, music. I'm looking forward to, because I still feel like there are lots of questions we have as parents of how the kids growing up, and there's so many things I still feel I don't understand. Still trying to find the answer. So I'm looking forward to some of the future conversations with Victor and Alyssa and some other young adults.